Okay, hi, and welcome to what may well be the last video in this mini-series of rigging and animating our biped. So far you should have used reference images to model your shape, and in the last episode we were just making this cat animation tool. And all that's really left is to connect the two objects. Now, the brilliant thing about using Autodesk's cat is that it has a load of preset animations. It is also very flexible. It takes its own keyframing type files, or if you even have access to mocap type software, you could actually create your own sort of keyframing file for cat, and you could import it into your image right here. But first of all, like I said, we need to make sure that the bones are affecting the mesh in the same way that we would expect our bones to affect the muscles and the flesh that are wrapped around them. So for example, if we had this hand bone move, we would want the mesh that's associated with the hand to move. We wouldn't necessarily want any of the arm or any of the leg to move. Now, this may seem very obvious, but actually to achieve this, we need to kind of avoid some errors, and it requires quite a lot of tedious editing. The main editing that we're going to do once we apply the appropriate modifier is we're going to affect the envelopes. Now, the envelope refers to the area around the bone that encapsulates the vertices that we want to edit. So what that kind of means in normal human speak is there is an area around this leg bone, for example, and we can't necessarily see that right now. We'll have a look at that in a minute. And anything that's inside that area will move when this bone moves, but everything that's outside of that area won't. And we can affect and change the values at which this envelope or this area alters those positions. But sometimes what happens is, say on the hand, the area of the envelope might get so big that it starts to capture some of these vertices that are quite near it, so that we get kind of some tearing. And I'm hoping that when we start with this, you're actually going to witness some of that. And it may look terrible at the beginning, but that's just because we need to learn how to alter these values manually. And there are two ways of doing that. We can either directly paint onto it. So you may have seen in the past something called weight painting. That's kind of an intuitive way of doing it, but it's not necessarily the most accurate. What we're going to do is we're going to manually go ahead and do that in this video. So the first thing we need to do is actually connect these two. Now, this isn't done through our normal kind of linking tools. It's actually done by a modifier on the skin. So you might think, kind of a lot of people think by default that it's done on the animation rig, but actually if we select our humanoid and we go up to modify and we go to modifiers, we'll find down here a modifier called skin. So what that's going to do is basically convert our mesh to a skin wrapped around a bone structure, kind of like our own bodies, right? So it's going to change this from an object to a skin that encompasses these bones. So once we've done that, this is accessible in the main stack. So we have our editable poly and we have our skin. And once we click on skin, we have all of the options. And you can see that edit envelopes is here that I talked about a minute ago. We don't need that yet, but we'll come to that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to come down here, and where it says bones, we need to add some bones, because it doesn't really know actually, just because they're inside our mesh, it doesn't know that they're the ones that we want to connect. So we're just going to go to bones and click add, and you'll get this pop up. And what you need to be very careful of is that you select all of them. Now that may seem obvious because kind of like this, they all appear to be selected, but this has child bones inside it, and when I open them, just because the parent one is highlighted, it doesn't necessarily mean the child is. Now there are a lot in here, so that could take some time, but the easiest way to do it when you have this box selected is just click Control A, and it will actually open up all of the sub menus. So rather than having to select all of those manually, that's just gone ahead and selected all of those. And you need to make sure that you have all of the bones in your rig selected, and then click Select. Now what we can see here is we now have lots and lots of different bones in our menu, and that's great. That means that they are now effectively added to the skin modifier, so they are in some capacity wrapped. So the next thing we want to do is just see how effectively that has been wrapped to our mesh, and see if we can identify any areas where we may need to manually adjust these envelopes. So one of the ways in which you can do it, it's the one I'm going to do, is I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to click on the biped, so the main platform for it down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put an animation on. So this is going to move the skeleton, and we'll be able to see how the mesh moves, and that will help to identify problem areas. So we're going to come over here, and one of the tabs we've not yet used is the motion tab over here, and this basically deals with all of the animation. And now because we have an animation tool, we can play around with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click stop, and I'm going to come down here, and we don't have a layer for our animation. We don't have any animation information in this box. So I'm going to left click and hold, and I'm going to come down to this one with the little green person moving, and that adds a new motion layer. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select what kind of animation I would like, and I'm going to come back down here to what looks like a little yellow paw print inside the green circle, and I'm going to click on it, and what you'll get is you'll get this. So here's some of the presets that are available, and 2 legs is brilliant because we have 2 legs. I'm going to double click on there, and what I want is I want the character to walk, so the game character walk preset, and I'm just going to double click on that, and then I'm going to load this into a new layer. I'm going to let that do that, and then we can see that it's now in there. So once I close that, if we go back over here and we now stop, we can see immediately that our mesh has moved. Now, if you have something that looks like this, it is not as bad as you may initially think. Okay? The most important thing is that if your bones have moved, you want to see some movement in your mesh. Now, as we can see, there are some areas of our mesh that have been affected by our bones, and there are some that have not. That's okay, right? So that is very, very common. That is something that you are expecting to see. And if we were to come down here and actually play our animation, we can see that this walk cycle is already done, it's already preset, and we can see all kinds of issues happening with the mesh being pulled left, right and center, being torn, some bits not moving, some bits crushing, and quite frankly, if this was a real human being, they would probably be in A&E right now. So, as I said, you needn't worry if this is the state of play when you sort of apply your animation. There is nothing wrong with your animation. There is not necessarily anything wrong with your mesh. The only thing that is a little bit out of whack is the envelopes on these bones. Okay, so as I said earlier, the area around these bones is not affecting some of the vertices, as we can see here. I'm just going to put edge faces on to see. You can see that maybe these points are not being affected as much as these ones are. And if we just step this through frame by frame, we can see that again, when it comes back here, some of these ones on this side are. Okay, so that's okay. All we need to do is we just need to play around with these envelopes a little bit. So if we select the cylinder, because the envelopes are part of the skin, so we need to access the skin modifier again. So if you select your biped, go to modify and go into skin, we can now edit envelopes. So this is a really manual and tedious process. So I warn you now, this was going to take a while. I will probably try and speed up some of it so that you don't get bored to death. But I will show you a couple of iterations of it on different bones, so you kind of get the idea of what you're doing. So the first thing to do is come down here and find the bone that you want to adjust the envelope of. And I'm going to do this hand, so this is on the left to me, but it's actually the character's right hand. So biped 01L would suggest that that's on the left side, so I'm just going to scroll down, and now biped 1R. So as you can see up here, our biped is called biped 01. These are the bones for biped 01. This is the right hand side, and down here I have biped right hand. So this should be this hand. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click Edit Envelopes, and I'm going to select Vertices. So the vertices of the mesh is how I'm going to affect the weight. And then I'm going to scroll down here until it says Weight Properties. So now what I can do is I can select vertices of my mesh. Okay, so you can see that when you select one, this little grey box comes up around it. And what we can do is, I'm just going to go ahead and select these ones. And now we come over to here, so weight properties, and it says absolute effect. So that's the property that means how much is this envelope, this red shape around our hand, affecting these vertices. And at the moment there's not a value in there. And this box takes a value between 0 and 1. So 0 is not at all, and 1 is wholly, completely affects every single aspect of the position and rotation of that mesh. So if I go ahead and change this to 1, you'll notice that that now moves in line with our hand a little more. So if I now select a few more, probably at the top of the hand, I might want these at about 0.8, because these might be slightly affected by the hand, the wrist as well. And let's now move these out. So I'm just going to put this back to 1. And you can see that that starts to move kind of more in line. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move through the animation a bit, and we can see that that is now moving quite nicely with the bone. So that's quite nice. But we can see that, for example, now with this kind of part of the arm, let's just try and find it. So it's not upper arm, it would be up here. Right calf, right forearm, there we go, there it's hiding. So now what we want to do is we just want to affect these ones as well. So we just want to select the vertices that are a part of that. Now make sure, you can see here that I've accidentally included one from the waist. We absolutely do not want that to be affected by our arm. So I'm just going to hold Alt and I'm going to drag over it to exclude it. So these are kind of all over the place. You know, there's lots of tearage here. But if I come down here and I affect this, change the absolute effect to 1, we can see immediately that they are realigned much better with this bone. And if I were to kind of come through this animation, we can see that actually that kind of now moves much better, in a much more kind of obvious way, and that looks much better. So that's really what you need to do with all of these, and it's very much what you do when you paint the weights, but it's not quite as easy to see or manually add different sections of the mesh. So you want to make sure that you are affecting all of the vertices. Otherwise you may end up kind of missing some and getting some pretty bad tearing. So even when you add some, you might kind of find that I'm still getting some odd movement kind of around here. Maybe I want to kind of move that out a little bit. And also I might be accidentally affecting some of these parts. So I might want to come in here and just select these and actually go here and make sure that they're on 0, so that just so I can manually confirm that there's no way that this arm bone is affecting any of the kind of torso, because that wouldn't be right. That's not how our bodies work. So now we can see we're getting a slightly better move. So just from that kind of short work there, we can see, I'm just going to unselect envelopes, we can see that as we play, this right arm looks much better than whatever's happening here. Okay, so as I said when I said don't worry too much about these kinds of things, this is just the fact that the envelopes aren't correct. There's nothing else wrong with your mesh. So carry on doing what you're doing, and I'm just going to quickly speed run through this section. I'm just going to update all of the mesh so you can see me do it, but it's really just a repetition of what I've been doing, so there's nothing new there, and then I will come back to this when we're done. So Okay, and now that that's done, there's just one last little thing that I want to do. Again, you could continue doing this, and there's lots of instances in this mesh in particular where some of the vertices may be partly affected by one bone and then partly affected by another. I've not necessarily focused too much on those at the moment, but just to make sure that this has has been working okay, and it's working okay, and we've not got any abnormalities that we've missed. I'm just going to come back over to the skin modifier panel, and I'm going to come down all the way down to the display section, which may be minimized for you. It may look like this. Just click the drop down arrow, and I'm going to click show colored faces. And once I put this on and then hopefully roll back up to here and select one of the areas when I am editing the envelopes, we can now see that we get this cool kind of heat map of each bone when we're selecting. And you can do this before you actually start editing different sections. It makes it a little easier to see exactly where the mesh sort of is being affected, and you can start to see this variation in amount. So for example, here we have red, and that represents that this part of the mesh is wholly sort of manipulated by this bone that we currently have selected. So red is associated with the value 1 if we were to scroll down here. So if we were just to select some of these, we would notice that it has 1, whereas yellow might be a variation between 0 and 1. For instance, if we select this yellow one here, it's 0.48. So actually we might want to then go back in and say, no, these should be a little more affected. Should this one, those different areas. And again, this part. But it's kind of, it's another one of those things where you could spend a lot of time on this, and maybe it would never even really be completely finished. But you might have, in the end, kind of a nice gradient in between areas which are grey, which are in no way affected by this bone, and areas that are completely red. And you just want to make sure that there's no parts on the body, no parts anywhere else that are being affected by this. One of the potential problem areas, so as we can see here, is in the legs, because all the mesh is so close together. So I'm just going to go ahead and just select all of that and set those to 0, and we can see that blue disappears. And again, we're just going to grab some of this butt and put this to 0 and this to 0. We don't necessarily want this being affected by the leg or the hip, maybe in this instance. There may be some cause for this. We can see that there's a little bit of blue on here, so that would suggest a very low level. But still, we don't want that at all. We don't want that kind of mess. And we can see that there's some blue up in here. We don't want that either, so we're just going to... There we go. That looks much cleaner. So just as a last pass, or as I said, you can quite easily have that, as a last check through. You can have it on as you do it the first time round. If you want, help you kind of catch some of these issues early on, which would definitely save you time. I'm just going to put that to like half. There we go. We can see now that as this moves, kind of some of the hip moves with it, we get a much smoother movement. And we might even, so again, we've identified here that this part isn't wholly updated by the thigh bone, despite it being a part of the thigh. And here we might want that like this. but these bits we might want to change to like a 0.5 so we get a kind of nice gradient from red to yellow. So that's pretty much it really as far as skinning your model goes. I'm just going to go and turn edit envelopes off, and now I'm going to turn this off so we get a nice smooth character. I'm just going to go ahead and play this and actually enjoy the fact that I have produced an okay humanoid walk. That's really an okay end product for first year work. That's really very good. I want to go ahead and save this, and if you want to have a little bit of fun, you can always select your controller and go back over to the motion tab and play around with the layers that you've got on here. So in the layer editor, you can sort of get rid of some of these if you want, and we can maybe open this up and we could maybe add run to the existing layer. So again, this is going to highlight some pretty extreme issues, so you might kind of use this as a last pass to blend some of these weights, but we could sort of, that looks pretty good. It's not too bad at all. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that these videos were helpful.